Hey there, so this time we have another battle report with the Cultists. They are facing off against Saurian Ancients. I altered the list a little bit, so instead of having 2 units of Brazen Beasts, in this case I only have 1 unit of Brazen Beast, just for the people that saw the previous video. For those who didn't see the video, Cultists are an extremely interesting army. In the sense that they only start with the models that are not demons on the board, and anything in their army list that is demons can be summoned through using field tokens in the magic phase, and then you can place them within 12 inches of either the cult leader because he has the Master of Ritual, or within 12 inches of one of the cultists units that have unholy conduit. So yeah, in the end you end up with an army that initially doesn't deploy a lot on table, because only the cultists in this army, the cult leader, the demon symbiote, which is basically a beefed up hero, and the possessed are going to start on the board, and the rest is only going to be summoned through the summoning process. The possessed, they are a unit that is halfway cultist and halfway demon, so they do have the 5-up Aegis that comes with it. They do have magical attacks, they are supernal, and they do start on the board, so that's really nice. And then you see this upgrade Wayward Children a lot in the army list. This gives the models +1 move, +2 march, and +1 agility. Basically did this to differentiate them from a basic human stat line that most of the cultist entries share, to make it more an elf like stat line. And then these possessed, they are really really strong unit. So with the upgrade afterwards, they do have only offensive and defensive 2. That's their only letdown. But they start at strength 4. With red age you go to strength 5. You have a spear and agility 5. So if someone charges, you go to agility 7. The spear gives you an extra AP, so you go to AP 3 standard, and if someone charges you, to AP 4. And they have 2 attacks each standard, so if you deploy them 6 wide, 3 deep, then you got 18 attacks, because you fight in 3 ranks, 6 more attacks from the front rank, 24, champion 25 attacks. With offensive only 2, but you have strength 5 and AP 3 or 4 depending on whether the opponent charged or not. So that is really potent. And then if they lose combat, they will just lose a couple of wounds because of being supernal rather than to break. So these are difficult units to get rid of, especially for the price that they are priced at. And then we go to the Saurian Ancient list. So my opponent is trying out a little bit to find his way also into Saurian Ancients, which is why it's a really balanced list. So we have a Quaddle Lord, General BSB on Avocation. Avocation is a bit of a strange lore for Saurians, I think, or at least not often picked, because you don't have another lore to couple up with it to make the snipes work. My opponent doesn't have a lot of access to avocations in the different armies that he plays, so he wanted to try it out. Then you have a Saurian veteran on a Carnosaur. I think this is a really good model for the cost that it, for the price tag that it bears. Then we have some Saurian warriors, some Caimans, some Raptor riders, Rampedons, Starsaurs. Basically, it's just a balanced Saurian ancient army. And then for spells, I only have the spells now for the cultists. So the cult leader, he is on avocation. He took Ancestral Aid, Whispers of the Veil, Spectral Blades, and Touch of the Reaper. Touch of the Reaper I mostly took to maybe have a chance at putting a couple of wounds on the Quaddle Lord, also to have a way to inflict some damage on the Saurian veteran, even though I am going to try to get him with my Titan Slayer chariots. But alternatively, I didn't really have any appealing choices there in terms of magic. The demon symbiote, he took Scrying and the Stars Align, so I have a plethora of combat buff spells. I have a redundancy of having 2 spells that can allow me to reroll to hit, which is important with offensive 2. Yeah, I think these spells, they bring a lot of value to the close combat oriented army. And here you can see an army pick of the cultists that I'm going to be using. So I will be using my Dread Elves as the cultists. The units in the front are going to be the possessed units. The units in the back are going to be the cultists, each with their banner bearers. Then I have the red-haired woman on the front. Is going to be the cult leader. The guy in the back is going to be the demon symbiote. And then in the back you have the models that I'm going to use as my demons. So on the left, all the way on the left, we have the Myrmidons. Behind them we have the Hoarders. On the right we have, in this picture it's still 2x3 Brazen Beasts. And then a Blazing Glory in between them. I made cards also for my opponents so they can more easily track what unit is what. And then you can see a picture of these here. Yeah, so without much further ado, let's get into the battle. Here you can see us deploying both armies. We are playing Refused Flank and King of the Hill. I put my counter quite appropriately on the hill. My opponent put his counter near the wall on the right on the table. So for my objective I have to make sure that my opponent doesn't go on the hill on the top left, and for my opponent's objective he has to make sure that he keeps me away from the walls on the right of the table. So with the cultists you're always allowed to choose the table side because you get a +6 modifier on this roll, which means that your opponent is always able to deploy first if he wants. And I think generally it's a good call to always go for as early of a deploy of your army against cultists as you're able to do so. Because otherwise, if you give the cultists the first turn, they get their demon stuff on the table earlier. And the first turn, they can react to your deployment. So these two units of possessed, they can zone out parts of the table. And if you let them deploy after you, then obviously you can also put the possessed in crucial positions. But you're also driven a little bit backwards on the table, so you have less space on the table to play around with. So also the chances of getting your cultist units or your cult leader to summon demons on the flanks of your opponent's army are way lower. So I guess generally if you play against cultists, general tip, just deploy as fast as you can and just try to take the first turn. Because the cultist deployment is probably not going to differ a lot from this standard deployment that you see being done here. So it's going to be an army with some core cultist troops that are going to hang back because they are the ones that are going to summon the demons. Then you either have core units of cultists that scout and have throwing weapons so they don't deploy anyway. Or you have the possessed, and there's some option for a giant, I believe. But they mostly will try to zone out your pieces on the board, trying to make sure that you're not going to get very close to the cultists very easily, because you need the leverage to get your stuff on the table. You need to delay your enemy in order to be able to put your demons in the favorable positions on the table. So my opponent is deploying after me, and I could imagine that he also could have gone for a deployment on one flank, a very heavy deployment on one flank. He could have used the hill to cover part of his approach, and then the next turn pop everything into line of sight and just saturate the field with charge targets. He's going for a bit more balanced deployment. So he spreads out his entire army basically over the entire line. And it's nothing wrong to do this, but yeah, maybe against cultists specifically, it's valuable to just focus on one flank, just to try to get rid of the back line as well as the front line. But yeah, it was one of our first games with and against cultists. So it's always challenging to find out how to play against a specific army if you have never played against it before, and even more so with these weird army rules that the cultists have. Yeah, so the deployment ends up to be something like this, and you can see here an indication of what units are what. The units on the top right are still the demons that I can summon throughout the rest of the game, and yeah, my opponent just really spreads out. All his choices, also the monsters. I think it's a good call of him to spread out the monsters because I only have the Titan Slayer chariots to counter the monsters. And had he grouped all of the heavy lifting stuff on one flank, I would have been more sure of my deployments of the Titan Slayer chariots. Like right now, I need basically one on the left flank and one on the right flank because there's Steganons on both flanks. Had he grouped the Steganons together, then I would only have had to worry about one part of his army where these Steganons would be. Anyway, so he's going to have the first turn, or he's not going to have the first turn because I dropped first. So he is a little bit in a tight spot with his Rampadons. So these guys have Vanguard and they have Frenzy and they have all kinds of special rules to make sure that they perform very good against their targets. So he marks the Titan Slayer chariots with these units. But if you don't have the first turn, then they're a little bit awkward to use because they can be frenzy baited, and if they're frenzy baited against units that are not their target or that strike before them with a high offensive output, like for example these possessed, then they are gonna take a lot of damage before they go in, and then they only have a couple of attacks to make up for it. So with my units that are the targets not on the board yet, and with them not being able to vanguard up and move up the full 16 or 18 inches, he's not able to get out of the arcs of my possessed, or at least not yet. So as you can see, I am leaving in my first turn quite a considerable gap in my deployment. However, I'm still gonna do my magic phase. It's my turn 1, so I can only sacrifice, or I can only use 2 veil tokens to summon demons. And for each of these veil tokens, I can conjure up to 200 points of demons. So with 2 veil tokens in the first round, you can either summon 2 units of worth up to 200 points or 1 unit up to 400 points. Now the demon army roster doesn't have a lot of units that are worth less than 200 points, so it's only the Sirens, the Furies, and the Mage Blight Gremlins. And the Sirens and the Mage Blight Gremlins, they both have special deployments like Vanguard or Ambush. So out of these choices, probably the Furies are still the most valuable option, but it's only a chaff piece essentially. So probably you're gonna, if you face off against Cultists the first turn, you'll see just a drop off in between 200 and 400 points, costing 2 veil tokens to the player to put down. But these veil tokens, they're not really an issue for the owning player to discard, because the Cultist core units with the Unholy Conduit that can summon the demons, they also have channel 1. And then I have a Wizard Master and a Wizard Adept, so I channel a total of 5. So just to discard a couple of veil tokens to summon demons is not really a big deal in this army. Just because you have this really easy access of veil tokens through your core units. Yeah, so this is the first turn of the demons. My opponent decides not to charge anything into anything, and he's just going to figure out how to deal basically with these possessed units. I think in the end the unit on the top left I misplayed, and I should have just more aggressively put him on the middle on the hill. I mean, if the Stegadon is going to charge in, sure he's going to do some impact hits, sure he's going to do some damage. And I know Stegadon's can do a lot of damage, but I still have a 5 of Aegis. I still strike after the impact hits with 3 ranks against the Stegodon, so that's 4 models wide, is like 17 attacks. I could have buffed him up with magic, so I have a reroll to hit or a reroll to wound. So it's 17 attacks. If I hit on 4s, then it's 8 hits. I have strength 5, so I wound actually on 5s. That's still like 2 wounds, maybe 3. If I'm hopeful with a reroll, I could get to 4 or 5 wounds. That's a badly damaged Stegodon. So it's unlucky that my demon symbiote is on the other side of the table, but he can't be everywhere all the time, because he's bringing in 4 attacks at strength 8 due to Titanic Might. He also has a spear, so he really adds up some damage to the unit. So I probably should have played the Possessed on the left more aggressively, because my opponent was likely not gonna charge in anyway with the Stegodon. Yeah, so on the right side, my opponent is setting up a little bit of a trap for my Possessed. So if I charge into the Saurian Warriors, then I'm going to be facing up against an overrun into his Stegiosaur. Yes, I believe it's called. No, the Tyrosaurus. And then if I don't overrun, I'm gonna be charged by a Stegodon, a Carnosaur, the Caimans, and a unit of Saurus Warriors. So that's not good in any case. But I still have a trick up my sleeve where I can summon demons, obviously. So I might still be able to make something out of this. So my plan here was to charge in with the Possessed into the Saurus Warriors below the wall. Then go through them, go into the Tyrosaurus, move my hero up to have strength 8, AP 3 on this guy, and then the support attacks of the Possessed to finish him off, because that should be enough, I think. And then in the meantime, go down with the Cultists all the way on the right to put something to chaff up the Stegodon, the Carnosaur, and the Caimans all at the same time, so that I can take my time to deal with the Tyrosaurus. And then on the left flank, the Possessed were just gonna push backwards the Stegodon. If he wants to, he can still charge in. If he doesn't want to, that's fine by me. Blazing Glory is just gonna try to grind through the Saurus Warriors, because he's quite resilient against them. I mean, I have myself 5 attacks that hit on a 4+ due to parry, and wound on a 3+, with a stomp added to it. He doesn't have any armor saves from me, and he's gonna strike back with, I am 50 millimeters, so 8, 12 attacks, champion 13. He's hitting me on 6s actually, he's wounding me on 5s, so and I still have a 5 of Aegis. So this first wound is quite difficult to get in. Afterwards, after the first wound, he's still hitting me on 6. Is he? No, he was hitting me on 5s, I believe. Yeah, because the difference is 4 more. So he's hitting me just on 5s. Still, it's quite difficult for him to get some wounds in on this model. And I was really curious to see how well a Blazing Glory would cope with a unit of Saurus Warriors. Yeah, so the turn of my opponent to me wasn't that impressive yet. And I think I actually on the right, after all, should have just gone back with my Possessed, because in this scenario he's pushing up his Saurus Warriors, but he's keeping his long range stuff a little bit backward. So I could also have very easily just deployed some Brazen Beasts all the way on the right flank if I hadn't gone in with the Possessed, because in this scenario I do need the Cultists on the right to provide the chaff piece to block the Stegodon and the Carnosaur. So alternatively, I could have just moved up with the Cultists to deploy some Brazen Beasts on the flank, put another unit of Brazen Beasts. Oh no, that was the other army that I played. Just put something like Myrmidons in the center of the battlefield, and then just back up a little bit with Possessed, and still put some pressure on the flank with the Possessed on the other side. I think in this battle I actually was a bit too aggressive with my list. So these cultists, they really have to do stuff in combat. But then again, my opponent also doesn't have a lot of ranged output, so we were a little bit in a standoff situation at this moment, and my army still enables me to look for the matchups that are favorable to me. So I could still also have deployed just Titan Slayer chariots on one flank to try to dominate the flank. I think movement-wise, I had more advantages in this game than my opponent, just because the charge range on my possessed unit is kind of equal to the maximum charge range in his army. So because he has the Saurian Cold One cavalry that charges with a 7, but if he charges into my possessed, he's going to be killed before he gets to strike. But my possessed are basically a delete button for any of his units. So yeah, I should have just not been as aggressive as I was in this scenario, because the situation on the right, it is doable. So I did sacrifice here a unit of Hordes in order to block all of the units of my opponent. And as you can see, I'm also summoning up my Myrmidons. And I'm making one big mistake here, and that is that the Myrmidons only have AP1. And yeah, that's not going to cut it against this Saurus cavalry. And the other mistake that comes with this major mistake is the fact that the Saurus cavalry on the left is actually able to see the flank of my Myrmidons in the way that I deployed them now. So I should have done this a little bit more careful. Placing new units on the table is something that requires some coordination and some rethinking of whether the choice you make is a good one or not. So in my opponent's turn, he does charge in with the Saurus cavalry into the front and into the flank of my Myrmidons. He backs up a little bit with the Stegadon on the left, and he charges in with the Carnosaur into my Hordes together with the Caimans and Stegadon. So yeah, he does a lot of wounds, a lot of wounds onto the Myrmidons. So these cold ones, they have 2 attacks each. The Riders have 2 attacks each. The Riders have strength 6 on the charge, so it was basically just a slaughter fest. In the end, it's only 18 wounds with resilience 3 that I have in the unit. And then the unit, they only managed to kick down one of his Saurian cavalry. And unfortunately, it was one of the guys in the front unit. Had it been one of the guys in the side unit, I would maybe have still been steadfast. No, I should have just killed one of the guys in each of the units to remove his ranks to be steadfast, and then I would have been able to hold out for an extra turn, even that, though that might not have been that valuable after all at the end. Yeah, then we go to the combat with the Hordes. The Hordes are large infantry, or large beasts, sorry. So the Carnosaur has multiple wounds, 2 against large models. So also against these guys, he hits them on a 4+, but with battle focus he ends up having 4 hits. He ends up doing 4 wounds, and I end up not getting a single save through, so he actually does 8 wounds with just the Carnosaur alone, which is enough to remove 2 models, and I would already crumble on the static combat rest. Or the combat rest generated, and then with the remainder of his attacks he actually kills off the Horde. So Hordes are described sometimes as ultimate grinding units. Yeah, not against this clear counter of the unit. So I can imagine that against some clan rats or some Empire heavy infantry, you're gonna hold out for a long time, but against some other choices you might not, because in the end you only have resilience 5, parry, defensive 5, and a 5 of Aegis to go for you. But against the real offensive choices in the different armies, I don't think he'll come out on top. Yeah, so then the combat with the Possessed against Tyro's Cutters, Tyro thingy, that didn't really go well for me. So I think in the end I did 1, maybe 2 wounds, but nothing near the expected kill that I was going for. So I had expected to be able to actually kill the thing in just 1 round of combat, but now I'm still stuck against it. So that's a bit of a bummer. And also the Blazing Glory doesn't manage to break his Saurian's warriors. So I'm a little bit of in a nasty position here right now. So I elect to chaff up the middle of the field with my Cultist units, having to sacrifice them after the misplay of the unit of Possessed on the left. Also the misplay of the Myrmidons with the Saurus cavalry has cost me greatly. So I really have to go into recovery mode here to make something out of the game. So the fact that I push up my cultist units in the middle as far as I do does allow me to deploy a Titan Slayer chariot at the back of my opponent's lines. So I do threaten his Slann Mage Priest a little bit, limiting the positions where he can stand, and I also threaten his Carnosaur and the Tyroscutus. So if it's still around at the time that it's my turn, I might have a charge there. And otherwise, yeah, I'm just trying to cast as much magic as possible to save my Possessed on the right, because right now with the Tyroscutus there, it's not really a good situation for me, because my opponent has a charge with the Caimans in the front, with the Carnosaur in the flank, and he's going to be able to keep me stuck in that combat without me being able to do a reform. So also my character can go into contact with any of his models, and he still has Taurosaurus Vigor on his Carnosaur. So yeah, that's still a tough model to get through. So whilst the Possessed they might be able to shoot through a lot, I don't think they're gonna be able to deal with a Carnosaur on the flank with 5 wounds. And then we do some combat, and my opponent is actually able to go through my unit of cultists on the right, and he gets an overrun of a 12, or a partial of a 12, I mean. And then it's his turn, so we check the line of sight, and he is just barely able to see the Brazen Beasts that I just deployed. Yeah, this was really terrible. So he does get a charge with his Tagadon onto my Brazen Beasts in the flank, and it was really coming from an angle that I didn't really see coming. So that really bumped me out. Yeah. Had he overrun a little bit less, he still would have seen me. So probably I also misdeployed this unit a little bit. But yeah, it takes two to well on both sides we have to learn how to deal with these cultists. So you have to find their strengths and also their weaknesses. And it's not only the player playing against them that has to learn these things. Yeah. But also judging from my previous game with cultists, I decided that Brazen Beasts are not really my thing in this type of army. Also, if I were to play just Demon Legends regularly, I don't think I would play them a lot, just because you're so incredibly charge dependent with a unit that has such a big footprint. So, for example, if my opponent was going to put a cowboy right in front of one of the outermost Brazen Beasts, you only get the impact hits of that Brazen Beast, the extra attacks of that Brazen Beast. You don't get a lot of merit out of your unit if your opponent is smart and just clips your unit with a unit. Yeah, so then we go to his turn. He goes in with the Stegadon. He goes in with the Saurus Warriors onto my cultists and cavalry onto my other cultists. And yeah, basically he's just cleaning up. at this point, even though I still have my 2 logs of Possessed. But he does go in with the Caimans, he does go in with Carnosaur, so we'll see what happens there. And then, just to note, even in this round, I'm not able to fully remove the Tyroscutus from the board, mainly because of good rolls for armor saves of my opponent. I believe a lot of players don't value the worth of the Tyroscutus in Saurian Ancients in general. But I think it still gives you an interesting choice in the army because it's really sturdy for the points that it costs, and it's only it also still allows you to get an extra channel in the army. So whilst it doesn't really do a lot itself, it also prevents your opponent from doing a lot just by being stubborn also on itself. So yeah, and it's basically a bit of a nope button. The only downside is that it only has advance 5, march 10. So that's a bit slow, but in an army where your staying power is mostly based on not really dying that fast and still having some damage output yourself and just relying on cold-blooded. But for the situations where that doesn't really help, you still have this Tyroscutus that is really sturdy for the amount of points that it costs. So after some magic and some movement, we go into combat. My opponent is still grinding down my Blazing Glory, who's just left at 1 wound by this point. But he still manages also still to kill some Saurians. Unfortunately, my opponent does manage to kill my Blazing Glory in this round, so apparently the matchup between Saurian Warriors and the Blazing Glory goes to the Saurian Warriors. And then we go to the combat with the Possessed. So I do inflict 2 wounds onto his charging Carnosaur character, which is quite reasonable for just a unit that is being charged into the side. And then he elects to focus attacks on my character. I don't remember with what. I believe it's also just with his character that he's doing this. And then the Caimans, they still strike at my Possessed. The Tyroscutus still strikes. I don't know if the Carnosaur already struck or not. But in the end, my dice are really not showing the sides that I would want them to show. My opponent's dice are quite hot in this engagement. So with the amount of attacks that he has, he still manages to inflict 9 wounds onto my units after the 5 of Aegis. So counting back, I don't even think he had more attacks than that, nearly, including the 3 wounds on my hero in that unit. So that was really a lucky turn for him. But otherwise, I think he would still have grinded down my Possessed in that matchup. If only this Tyroscutus would have died earlier, and even in this round, it didn't die to all of the attacks of the Possessed that just were needed to tick off the last remaining wound, I think. So yeah, these let me see, like 16 attacks. That's strength 5 with AP 3 were not enough to kill this beast. So I'm not saying that this beast is incredibly resilient, I'm just saying that this round the die rolls really didn't go in my favor. Yeah, so then we continue with some chasing of my by my Possessed of his other units. Yeah, these Possessed, they, as I already said before, they were really messing up the first turn of the game. I should have just moved them way more towards the center, just put them on the hill, and ask my opponent what he was going to do about it, basically. Yeah, because now I'm in a situation where they are not putting the threat on the table that they should, because at this point of the game I don't have any other threats on the table anymore, so my opponent can just double flee from this unit, and then I don't get a charge, we don't engage anything, and he can just leave them and just collect them another day. Yeah, so I do still deploy the Titan Slayer Chariot all the way on the left. I believe I use my cult leader, who is just off screen in this recording right now, but you can barely see his base above the hill in this shot. So the Titan Slayer Chariot still zones out a little bit his Stegadon. Yeah, and then basically by this time the game is already decided in favor of my opponent. Because I'm not gonna get any more points anywhere probably. So the Titan Slayer Chariot, on the bottom, he still charged into my opponent's Rampedons, and the Titan Slayer Chariot was actually the charge target for these guys. So he did have a lot of attacks. He did have battle focus and reroll to hit and stuff. Yeah, I did survive, but only with like 1 wound, and then I overrun in the ruins. And Titan Slayer Chariots are one of the few things in the Demon Legion book that are actually constructs rather than beasts. So my Titan Slayer Chariot had to test on a 2+ instead of a 3+, and he had to add an extra die. In the end, he ended up having 4 wounds, and it only has 4 wounds. So yeah, so that killed the Titan Slayer Chariot. Yeah, so at this point I only have my block of Possessed still on the table. 1 Titan Slayer Chariot in the top left, 1 Blazing Glory, Brazen Beast, sorry, in the top right, and my Cult Leader just off screen on top of above the hill. So yeah, if my opponent is just able to conserve his points, then it's going to be a 20-0 for him, because I don't have his objective. He does have a Saurian Cavalry model on my hill that I cannot remove anymore. Yeah, so after all this carnage, we tally up the points, and then yeah, it's a 20-0 for my opponent. I made a big mistake with the Possessed in turn 1, not putting them on the hill as I should have, because any of the charges that my opponent could have done would likely not have resulted in me losing the combat very badly. Meaning that I would just get him stuck in combat, and getting his Stegadon stuck in combat is good because he doesn't get the impact hits anymore. He just has the stomp attack, but I still, even though I am infantry, so I'm a good target for his Stegadons, I still have my 5 of Aegis, so in prolonged combat with the 2 attacks at strength 5 each, with the spears, so the extra AP, etc. I probably would have grinded down his Stegadon anyway, so I was too scared of his Stegadon on the left flank. So had I moved up my Possessed more offensively, I would have zoned out his Saurian Cavalry. Then the next mistake was the Myrmidons between the hill and the building. First of all, I deployed it wrong. Second of all, I deployed them in the wrong place. Third of all, I don't really know if these Myrmidons are the right choice, because yeah, you also want to have to charge with them to get the battle focus basically, and they only have strength 5 AP1, so they very clearly have their specific matchups, and of course being charged by 2 units of cavalry at the same time is definitely not ideal. So it might be a sturdy block in other situations, but so far I've only used them kind of as sacrificial a unit. And yeah, they only have defensive 4, resilience 3, and a 5 of Aegis. So that is kind of comparable to just standard infantry, but you only have 18 wounds in the unit, so yeah, it's a frail unit in that regard. I am considering just swapping them out for 20 Lemures with Venom Sacs to give them poison, or maybe to just drop the Demon Core altogether and go for more Cultists. So to go for Cultists with an Eternal Champion 3 times on the field, so you have a triple hereditary spell, and yeah, so that's quite funny that you have 3 times the Spear of Infinity against some matchups. But that was it for today. So apparently it is possible to get massacres against cultists, so that's good to know. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. See you the next time.